Hello, everyone. I'm Peter Coy. I'm the president of the New York Financial Writers Association, and I'm pleased to announce the winners of the Impact Award, and they are Michael Smith and Nacha Cattan of Bloomberg News, and former Bloomberg News editor Cam Simpson. The three were chosen as award winners for their investigative reporting that exposed how leading U.S. chemical companies fuel the narcotics labs that are flooding America with deadly drugs. After I give a little introduction to them, John Beers will moderate a panel discussion. And John was a correspondent for Agence France Presse in New York, who chaired the selection committee. The other panelists, the other members of the selection committee were Michael Paterakis and Zach Colley. So thanks to all three of you. Unfortunately, Cam Simpson, one of the three honorees, has left Bloomberg News and is now located in London and will not be able to participate in this evening's discussion, but we have Nacha and Michael on with us. I just want to, I'll have John give the bios of the three winners. All I want to do is tell you a little bit about the New York Financial Writers Association and the Impact Award. The New York Financial Writers Association is a decades-old organization that is today known for the financial follies, of course, but we're far more than that. We're an organization devoted to giving awards to recognize the very best in business and financial journalism, giving out scholarships to worthy college and grad students studying journalism, and putting on both social and professional development events. We try to have something every month that highlights a particularly good piece of journalism and gives our members and guests the chance to learn from some of the best in journalism. The Impact Award, which we established 3 years ago in 2019, honors a story or a body of work by business journalists whose reporting has had impact, regardless of where the story or stories were published. And we are very proud of the Impact Award because it's different from the other awards that are out there. It specifically looks at impact, which does not always manifest itself right away. In fact, as John Beers will explain, the three articles that are being honored this evening are actually written and published in 2020, not 2021. And I think Britt Tunick, our executive director, is going to show you the plaque. Unfortunately, since we're not in person, we can't present it to you, but we will mail them to you. Just want to thank you for your great journalism that had a real impact, as John will explain. And then John will take over and he'll moderate the panel. Once again, thank you and congratulations to the winners. John, yours.
Hi, yeah, welcome to this event. I'm really honored to be here with these great journalists. I'm a board member on the NYFWA. We began working on this award last year and got a lot of really great nominees from different news organizations. And but when we met to discuss things, this package of stories really stood out. I just thought it was really great work on a lot of levels. The stories themselves, just point to a real problem and shine a light on this problem with how the chemical trade facilitates the narcotics trade in U.S. companies and their assets and their goods end up facilitating this very warped world of in Latin America. It just was a really important story, but also just incredibly ambitious, I thought, and on a lot of different levels, just in terms of being the actual looking at the drugs themselves and how it gets made, learning, sort of mastering that level of detail. It's cross-border. It goes through a lot of different complex laws and how things are supposed to work in different places and work differently in different countries. And then also, I just found I thought it was really a brave work, because it's the journalists got close enough to the story and this very scary world, I think, and got close enough to write with authority about it. So I was really just very heartened by this work, and I'm very thrilled to be here with everyone tonight. So I welcome you, congratulate you on this great story, on these great stories. And maybe you could just tell us a little bit about, each of you can talk for a little bit first to start off about how you got to this story, and maybe how you guys split up the work and how it fits in with your day jobs at Bloomberg.
Thank you. Mike, any preference?
Go ahead, you first.
Thanks. Thank you very much. We're very grateful for the award and the recognition. And yeah, I did want to talk a little bit about how it started. First, to say that Cam Simpson was instrumental, and we just want to give props to him, even though he's not here. He was the one who originally was talking to investigators of international narcotics control agency at the UN, and he was talking to them about the specific essential chemical in question, which is acetic anhydride, which is still being made in Mexico, but at the time with very little supervision or regulation. Yet there was no trafficking data of the chemical in Mexico into Mexico. So the investigators interpreted that as it was being made within the country's legal trade and then diverted. And so much of it was being produced here that it would be more than enough to supply the drug trade many times over to make the heroin that they were shipping to the US. So he contacted me and asked me to look into it, and I did. And originally we were looking at Celanese, because that chemical company makes by far the largest amount of acetic anhydride in Mexico. And so I traveled to Coatzacoalcos, Veracruz, which is a small port city, pretty violent. And I spoke with a bunch of people, private security officials, business leaders, some chemical thieves. And the city is filled with these chemical companies, and drug cartels kind of know it's this candy store for them to come and take what they can get. And that's where I found that Celanese lost tanker trucks of another drug-making chemical, monomethylamine, MMA. They had 3 separate hijackings, and we later found out that it was 30,000 liters of MMA was stolen in all, which could have produced 60,000 pounds of meth, which is more than all the meth that was seized by US border agents in 2016 and 2015 combined. So these thefts had not been previously reported, and because the company was in Mexico and producing in Mexico and selling their product in Mexico, they didn't have to report it to the Justice Department, because otherwise they would have run up against legal hurdles if they hadn't reported this in the US. But here in Mexico, they didn't have to. But then the story began to change course. I mean, there was some reporting on Celanese, and then I was looking at police photos of drug seizures, and specifically clandestine labs and lab busts in Mexico. And almost every time there was an acetic anhydride bust, I found photos of these J.T. Baker bottles. So, and that's, the J.T. Baker bottles are made by Aventor. So they were everywhere. There were small bottles, larger jugs, and they were often the only marked bottles that you can see in the photos out of hundreds of containers in these illegal labs in the middle of the woods, right? And so that's when we decided to turn our attention. That's when we realized that these JT Baker jugs and Aventura were really what were at issue, and that's where it kind of focused the story. And I'll leave it at that.
May I ask a quick question?
Sure.
When did you guys start? Because Celanese was left Mexico, didn't it? I think, or
No, they stopped selling meth
MMA.
in Mexico, MMA, that particular chemical. At some point after they had these problems with these truck hijackings. I think it was 2016. So they pulled that product line out of Mexico, but they continue to own a major chemical refining, chemical processing plant in that part of Mexico where Nacha went, and where I went after she went, and spent some time there doing reporting, trying to get to the bottom of these thefts, and also see if the other chemical, acetic anhydride, had gone missing, because there are, as Nacha said, this company Celanese, which is based in the U.S., is a major producer of that chemical. So the two of the main drug making chemicals, for the most serious narcotics consumed in the United States, heroin and meth, like Breaking Bad, are made by this company in Mexico. And by the way, just a little bit, that same chemical, that liquid MMA, was the chemical that was stolen out of a train, a train tanker car on Breaking Bad in one of the episodes. Fictitious, of course, but it's exactly the same chemical. And in Mexico, they didn't even have to stop a train; they just would take it off the highways. Are we still there?
I don't know. I'm still here.
Looks like everyone froze up.
Yeah, we're still here, John. John, can you? John?
Sorry.
John? I think John might be frozen.
Yeah, maybe we lost him. It looks like he dropped off.
Peter, you're here. You want to unmute?
Hi, I'm just saying that John, I think, froze and had to log off and probably come back on. So apologize for the technical difficulties. Fascinating. Wonder if I should interject a question now just to keep the conversation rolling while we wait.
I would. I would do that, Peter.
Michael, how did you, presumably Nacha started out this
Right.
thing. How did you and Cam come together with Nacha on this project?
So in 2019, probably a year after Nacha first started digging around, Cam contacted me because we're both on the same investigations team. We were at that time. And he knew that, I've done a ton of reporting in Latin America. I speak Spanish and Portuguese. I know Mexico really well. I've reported on sort of the drug industry in different ways along my career. So when he got further along with this nugget of the thesis we had, or he really came up with it, like Nacha said, he asked for my help because we were at the point where we needed to do more reporting in Mexico and more cross-border sort of stuff. And I was in a good position to do that because I'm based in Miami. And so basically, my first sort of part of this assignment was to go to Mexico City, and also to go to where that chemical plant company is, and just start digging around and talk to law enforcement, talk to people in the industry.
Hey, John, we have two of you on, so you got to get rid of one of yourselves.
Now we have two. The first challenge was to really understand how the chemical business works in Mexico, the industry. So I spent a lot of time just talking to chemical companies, ones that were involved in these products, but just in general, all kinds of chemical companies. And I went to a chemical industry conference that just happened to be going on when I first started reporting it. And I made a lot of the contacts within the industry and within the companies that we ended up looking at. just by digging around and talking to people. And that eventually led us to, to have a really good understanding of how these chemicals are produced and or imported into Mexico, and how they're sold and how they're available to buyers who could end up being agents for these cartels. And I also spent a lot of time meeting with law enforcement and the chemical regulators in Mexico, who really don't have a lot of power to do anything and don't do much in terms of policing these particular chemicals. So that sort of got us closer to showing how readily available acetic anhydride is. We kind of stopped looking into the meth angle because the producer, Celanese, had stopped selling it. But, we had the background of how they had lost just tremendous amounts of these chemicals. I mean, this is just an unfathomable amount of meth that was hijacked very brazenly on the highway between that chemical plant and Mexico City. I mean, at gunpoint, just crazy stuff. But luckily, they put an end to that by stopping the sale before we, ran our stories. But acetic anhydride was a completely different story. We just found that, we ended up tracking down, with Cam's significant help, the distribution network for this chemical, which are basically stores that sell laboratory supplies and chemicals. They're the kind of stores that sell chemicals to high school labs, literally. But anybody can just go in and buy them. And you buy a jug of this for, not a lot of money, and you can make kilos and kilos of really pure heroin. It's not difficult at all to make it.
John, let me hand it back over to you. I just asked a question while you were off the.
Guys, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have I'm told I have an unstable connection by my computer, which doesn't happen. But I guess it happens when you need it most. So I apologize. I did lose you for a little bit, but if it happens again, I'll go onto my phone. Let me ask you, guys, what can you just give a sense of the time frame of when you began this investigation, and maybe just it sounds like obviously you shifted course midway through in terms of after you decided that meth would not be as much the focus as some of the other drugs, but maybe just talk a little bit about that.
The timeline. So I'll always remember when I started, because I was 6 months pregnant when I went to Veracruz. It took a long time to do this story. So I guess it was sometime in 2017 towards the end, and then in 2018 is when I traveled to Veracruz, early 2018, and then we only published in 2020. So when my kid was 2, it was was when the story actually went out. It took a very long time to get all the pieces in place, and I think it was great that we were given the opportunity at Bloomberg to put in as much time as we did to come up with, a really robust investigation. It was kind of, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, what I was going to say is Nacha really, Cam pioneered it theoretically by sort of developing this thesis from talking to his sources at the UN about these weird imbalances of these chemicals in the global market. And then, Nacha spent some time doing it, and then there was sort of a break, I think, and then Cam slowly built to the point where he needed some help with the on the ground reporting. And that's when he contacted me, which was in 2019. And then I think I went to Mexico the first time in the fall of 2019, and spent quite a few intense months reporting not only the story, the Mexico story about acetic anhydride, but also a completely different story in Ecuador and Peru and Colombia about another chemical that we discovered just sort of by chance that was sort of in a similar, had a similar makeup as this chemical in terms of getting in to the narcotic supply chain. In that case, cocaine. So that, really the last half of 2019 was when everything sort of came together, and into 2020 where we could actually start publishing stories.
We have a question from the audience. Where did you encounter the most resistance to reporting? This is from Greg Miles. Where did you encounter the most resistance to reporting and then publishing your story? The companies, local authorities in Mexico?
Both.
Yeah, but it's funny. I get these questions all the time for stories that deal with very scary topics like drug cartels. And I've done a few, but I always feel like, it's not as dangerous to me as people from the outside see it as being. I like although maybe that's just my own ignorance, so maybe that's the way I make convince myself to do these stories. But in my experience for this particular story in Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, and Mexico, covered those 4 countries, and the U.S. The resistance was sort of passive in a way, like people just wouldn't get back to you, or they wouldn't give you a straight answer, or in a lot of cases they would try to hide things. They wouldn't talk to you about stuff in the case of law enforcement, for example. And in Mexico especially, that's kind of the way I've always encountered resistance, is sort of the bureaucratic machinations of the government or regulatory agencies or private companies just bog you down and try to sort of wear you down by taking forever to tell you anything, and then they usually don't tell you anything. So you have to sort of come at them from different sides and find documentation and find sort of whistleblowers who want to do the right thing. And finally someone has come and asked them, and they come up with the courage to talk about it. That's how I got most of my breaks in these stories.
Yeah, I agree that there is this kind of passive aggressive, we'll get back to you when we get back to you, and then you don't hear anything forever. Yeah. And I think maybe another point, I'm in Mexico now, and there's a lot of violence, against journalists too. I'm lucky enough to be in an international organization. I'm based in Mexico City. When I was in Veracruz covering the story, it felt very close, very real, very, dangerous, but not necessarily for me, because I just kind of went in and then went out. But, I worked with other reporters there, and it was very clear how much danger they're in whenever they're doing any kind of digging of this sort. So, I mean, the violence, I would say, and the danger of working in Mexico, I got a tiny glimpse of it when I was doing the reporting, but I would say that was, that is one of the obstacles, and it's a much bigger obstacle for people who are on the ground in small places like Coatzacoalcos, Veracruz.
Can I ask one question I wondered about was, like, within the UN group and within maybe other, regulatory world, people in the regulatory world, whatever, is this the kind of thing where people kind of knew that that these were US that there was a lot of stuff from the US or involving foreign companies that was contributing to the trade, and it was just sort of something people within that world kind of knew? Or was it really completely shocking? I mean, like, sometimes in these insular worlds, people kind of know what's going on, but nobody ever points it out. I don't know.
So one thing that was very surprising to me is that I kept going to US sources and US officials about this, because of course that's like their big thing, is to stop precursors and stop in Mexico, right? I mean, there's so many different layers of law enforcement here trying to do that. And honestly, I don't think that they were really aware of this. But of course, once you get closer to the sources, yes, people in the industry, trade organizations, they know what's going on, or once you get closer and closer, they do. But it was interesting, and I think even the U.S. ambassador at one point said, we should have known about this. This is something that the U.S. should have been aware of on the ground in Mexico. And I never got the sense that they were looking at this when we were doing our reporting.
No, and neither in Colombia or in Ecuador either. I mean, there were, like, for example, in the U.S. government, there are specialists that were aware of the chemicals, but in terms of the U.S. sort of law enforcement strategy and in the drug war, so to speak, they really, their main mission is to do seizures and to take down traffickers. The idea of launching a major case or investigation for the chemicals, I think that's really low on the priority, and much less paying attention to who makes them and where they're actually coming from. A lot of I talked to multiple sources, non-Mexican sources, non-Ecuadorian, and they all just assumed all the chemicals were coming from China. That's what they would say. Oh yeah, that stuff is counterfeit. They've brought in illegally from China. I'm like, whoa, yeah. Did you know that the biggest producer of acetic anhydride is in Mexico? They're actually selling in Mexico. Did you know that? No, I didn't know that. It comes from China. Like they just sort of that. And I think they genuinely believe that because they didn't really pay much attention to it. So it's quite surprising, actually, to me.
I have a couple of questions. Yeah, this is actually one Peter just has this, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the impact that it's had, the stories have had so far, and what you think. I mean, the stories are still relatively recent, and this is a big, long-standing problem. I mean, it's what has happened so far, and what do you think? What else do you think may come of this?
Mike, I don't know. I could just talk about Mexico because you have a lot more.
Sure.
Okay. Well, with acetic anhydride, at first we didn't really hear from the companies, or they gave us these quotes that you can see in the story. They didn't say much, but so right after the story ran, Aventor pulled sale of their chemical in Mexico, as we all know, and they just stopped producing it. And we didn't actually know right away, right? Because Mike, we only found out when we asked them what happened, what's going on now, and we checked in with them, and then the company said, "Oh yeah, we've pulled the chemical," and we think it's because they didn't want to make it public right away, because then there would be a mad rush for people to buy this.
Right, because they said that they collected it all and destroyed the stocks or did something with the actual stock.
Yeah, and then. The Mexican government, so we went to the Mexican president's daily press conference and asked them what they would do about it, and they said they would investigate, and they opened an investigation. We're not hearing that much about it. I have my doubts about how far it's going to go, and I know there was some impact then in the U.S. when an assistant attorney general was in the process of being confirmed, and some senators, I believe, were saying we have to look into her connection with Aventor. So I mean, it did kind of impact, both in the U.S. and in Mexico. What's interesting to me is, like, I haven't heard anything back on Celanese. I'm really, I don't know that they've done anything since the story, but I mean, they're also one of the big players here, but we haven't heard much from them. So we'll see what else comes up. But Mike, you probably want to say more on that.
Exactly. Like Nacha mentioned, in the United States, our stories came out right when, when Biden was nominating new people for the DOJ, and one of the top nominees, her father is one of the founders of Aventor, and she owns a ton of stock or owned, and she had to promise to put it into escrow or sell it, maybe, I think. So and that led to Senate calls from Republicans to investigate, this chemical, but we don't know if anything's actually come out of that in terms of a DOJ or investigation, which I guess it would be. Just on the for the other story that I worked on with Cam about calcium chloride in Ecuador and Peru and Colombia, which is an ingredient that's used to make cocaine. That company also stopped selling this product in South America right after our story was published. And it was the same thing. They didn't really announce it publicly, but when I called them, when I finally got them to call me back, they said, "Oh yeah, we stopped selling it sort of the day the story ran." And that chemical had just been flooding into Peru. It basically was getting into the cocaine supply line in Colombia via Peru and then Ecuador. It's just crazy. And it actually came from a factory in Finland. That's where they actually made the stuff. And you asked earlier about, were people aware of these chemicals, coming from abroad? And in that case, they were, because the Ecuadorian police, national police, had a special unit just to go after precursor chemicals. We learned this when we started, investigating the story. It was funded with U.S. drug war funding, and the cops in that unit were very talkative. And I quote a couple of them in the story, and they had a nickname for this chemical called Finnish, as like from Finland. And I'm like, what do you mean, in Spanish, Finlandés? And they're like, oh yeah, because it comes from Finland. It says right there on the bag. And I'm like, what bag? And they showed me some bags that they had confiscated, and it had the name of this company on it, and it said made in Finland. So right then and there, I knew exactly where all this stuff was coming on. And in all the seizure photos, you could see this bag, bright blue bag, from this one producer that I figured out is in Houston, actually. And that's how, it was just being followed down the supply chain and into all the cocaine labs in Colombia. Quite dramatic.
Was that Tetra? Was that the company?
Yes. Yeah.
Did they do anything after this? I mean, have they? Because I think, didn't your story on them end with them just sort of saying we're
yeah. So after our story was after our story was published, they did pull that product.
Oh, they did,
or at least they said they did. And Peru also clamped down on policing these imports, because that's it's a really fascinating part of all these stories, is how the narcotic supply lines find backdoors and find loopholes and find weak regulatory barriers. They exploit these weaknesses around the world. And if a country or a company isn't policing itself as it should, that's how they get in. And so in this case, they were going through Peru, because Peru didn't have this chemical calcium chloride in its list of drug precursor chemicals, officially recognized chemicals that are essential for making cocaine, for example, because there's a UN red list of all these chemicals, and this one wasn't on the UN one, but it was on the Colombian list and the Ecuadorian list. So Colombia and Ecuador were policing this chemical, but Peru wasn't. So that's how they would find, they get it into Peru legally, and then purchase it for illegal use and just truck it up through, through Ecuador to Colombia. And the Peruvians have since really clamped down, because they put it on their list. So I don't know where, how they've replaced that supply line, if you will.
Another question from Peter. If you could talk a little bit about maybe how you got into investigative journalism and what advice you have for people who are interested in that kind of work, which can, have such incredible, be just so rewarding, I think, and important.
I'm not an investigative journalist formally,
Oh,
but
yes.
you know,
Yes, you
speaking
are.
of, well, I mean, I'm a bureau chief. I'm the bureau chief in Bloomberg in Mexico. And when I was working on the story, I was covering the economy and the government. But because I've been here so long and I've done so many stories on the drug war here, it was just natural for me to also want to cover this kind of story. I had been to a lot of hotspots, you know, where there were clashes on the border or vigilantes and things like that. So I had covered a lot of that over the years, and it was natural for me. But it wasn't, you know, as part of an investigative journalism role, because I know, you know, Mike is dedicated to that more. But it was great. It was great to be able to do it and to have the opportunity to do it with the rest of the team. And
Yeah,
I learned
well,
a lot.
first of all, I would say that Nacha is an investigative journalist because the way you prove it is by the stories you do. And I think that's kind of the way I got into this. And you have to have a really good idea that you suspect is happening and nobody's probably reported on it. And you just have to start digging and digging and digging and have a lot of patience and a lot of tenacity and not, you know, not to give up easily. That's really what it takes to be an investigative journalist. And you have to be good at, you know, being a journalist and writing and communicating what you find and finding a way to organize all these disparate pieces of information into a cogent storyline. Like these series of stories did so brilliantly, and it all started with Cam's sort of hunch, you know, based on data he was seeing and sources he was talking to that were looking at it from, you know, 30,000 feet above and seeing there's something weird here, and that's kind of the way the big stories happen. You sort of look at something that's right in front of you and go above and try to see, well, okay, this is happening because, you know, this entity halfway around the world is doing something wrong and it's going along and here it's following this trail and it ends up right here, you know, something that's sort of in front of you all the time. And I got into that with Bloomberg early in my career because a colleague was working on a story here in Miami actually, and he didn't speak Spanish, and all the people in the street that he wanted to talk to spoke Spanish, and I had done a lot of reporting in Latin America, and he asked me to help, and that's what got me in. And it was a story about this company that does that did perform clinical trials for pharmaceutical companies, and they would recruit undocumented Latino immigrants as their guinea pigs, human guinea pigs, and make a lot of money off of it, and doing all these horrible things. And so I started reporting that like I would report any story. You go and talk to people, you get out and you just try to find an empathetic connection with people that might be doing horrible things, and they start talking to you about it. And then you have to sort of go beyond that to finding documentation, corroborating, hopefully getting someone with authority to say this is not the way it should be done, and just going from there. But the main thing is tenacity and patience and heartbreak, putting up with a lot of heartbreak when it doesn't work out. Begging your boss
I think where the crossover is for regular journalists also is it's true, anybody can be an investigative journalist, but we're all talking to people, and we're all getting to know people and trying to empathize and trying to have them open up and tell us, and that's for any kind of journalist. So I think the crossover there is absolutely clear. And if you've done that for a business story or a story on, I don't know, stock market, or, you can do it for investigative journalism as well.
Can you maybe speak a little bit? We have a question here as well from the audience about what about the people use the sources, I guess, particularly in the companies who may have had fear of speaking to you. How did you encounter that very much, and how, and maybe talk a little bit also about how much, whether you had a lot of Michael touched a little bit on this because you said that there were some, I don't remember if this was the companies or the international organization, but that there had been people who wanted this story to come out. But just obviously, maybe talk a little bit about the sources and how people, maybe you got people to open up who might have not been able, who might not have done that if you, if you had, if they had gone differently or you had not approached them in the right way.
Do you want me to take that one?
Sure, I'll jump in.
Yeah, well, the hardest part was finding the people who, because these chemical companies are very big, and it's a very complex technical business. Obviously, it's chemicals. Like, I'm the worst in chemistry. I never did well in chemistry. So it had a really hard part was finding someone who had some connection to the production or marketing of these specific chemicals, and that's that took a while on just digging up people on LinkedIn or within associations and professional associations, and reaching out to them and convincing them to talk. And most of them did not want to talk. They didn't want to lose their jobs, or I don't know if they were scared, but a lot of them, I think, were scared because they're quite aware of what these chemicals are used for, and and certainly aware of the kind of people that would be acquiring these illegally. But some people, I was surprised, they really were willing to talk, and most of them didn't want their name to be published, but some of them actually didn't seem to mind being quoted. I don't even know if I needed to in the end, but I think they were aware that something weird was going, something, that wasn't right the way things were working. So there were a couple of, I guess you could call them whistleblowers, who were able to give me great insight into how these businesses are working and how the stuff, was being diverted or was sort of sitting there waiting to be diverted to the narcotics business. But it just took a lot of, convincing and first of all, getting them to answer your emails or whatever, and then getting them to agree to meet eventually.
When you were at the chemical, you mentioned you went to some industry conferences, right?
Yes. That was actually quite helpful. That was good. Sorry.
Was it both for meeting sources and for learning the industry, or what was it, for both of those things, or?
Yeah, it was for both, because it was the, like, in Mexico they have a annual chemical conference, and they just happened to be having it when I started reporting the story, and I was planning to go to Mexico, and I found out about this. I'm like, wow, I got to go to that. And so I went to learn about the industry. Number one, well, I would say it was on the same level of urgency as finding people connected to companies that were involved in these specific chemicals. So I spent like 3 days just hanging out there and talking to everybody I could, learning about the chemical business, and they were, all very nice people and really excited to talk about their industry. And and so I had to sort of diplomatically approach the specific chemicals I was interested in, because it would be obvious why I was asking. But I basically spent that time meeting people and, getting their card and setting up meetings later one-on-one, to where I could sort of dig deeper into what I was really interested in.
And I think you have to be in person. Obviously, you can do as much as you want online through LinkedIn or through emails, but if you don't go to the place, in my case, to Coatzacoalcos, that's where I found all the information I needed in 3 days.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't gone down there, there was no way I could have done it. And so that does imply going somewhere where there are safety issues, but once you're there, and in most places in Mexico, I'm sure in other parts of Latin America, but people are just like, they will open up and talk to you if you're sitting face to face in a way that you'll never get over the phone. And I also found that people gave me information, and this is coming from industry leaders to security chiefs to the thieves who were doing it themselves. they were giving a lot of information once you were there. I mean, just the fact that you went to their town meant so much to them. And I think being pregnant might have helped.
I'm sure. Not to mention your natural charm, Nacha.
People just felt bad that I was sitting there. So
who actually went to buy I forget which chemical it was, but somebody
acetic anhydride.
Anhydride, yeah.
Somebody bought it online, right? One of you bought it like through Mercado, right?
Yes. Yeah, that was sort of a collaborative buy because we needed to do it in Mexico, and we needed to, it was very complicated, legally and ethically also. Like, okay, we can buy this stuff, it's completely legal to buy, but how are we going to get it delivered? Where are we going to get it delivered to? How are we going to pick it up? So and the idea would be to sort of just return it when we received it, if possible. So it was quite complicated, but that was originally Cam's idea to do it that way. Now he found the ads. I think I found some too. And then later I went to one of the stores where they sell it in Mexico City, acetic anhydride, and just went in and said, "Oh, can I buy this chemical?" And they're like, "Yeah, and here's our price list," and I'm like, "Do I have to show an ID?" No problem, or only if you use a credit card, because we want to make sure you're not, you're not using someone else's credit card. But I just walked in the store. It was literally one of these.
In Guerrero, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, and that was actually in Mexico City. In Guerrero, Cam went out on the road.
Yeah.
To make those purchases and go into the stores there, and that to me was probably very intimidating. Would have been intimidating where he went, and he was quite, because that was in the heart of the heroin trafficking region of Mexico.
It's where the 43 students were killed.
Right. And that's what he did. He just went to the different stores and found where they were selling it and found where he could buy it if he wanted to.
And then I had to organize having it shipped to Mexico City and the photos and all that.
Yeah, and our lawyers were quite nervous about that. We had to do it in a very, correct way, so as not to, we had to make sure, was it actually legal? Yes, it was legal in Mexico. And, so it was quite complicated to pull that off.
Yeah, I mean, I just found it like really shocking how easy it was to, that Mexico, there's so little, I mean, apparently so little, oversight of this that it's really, I mean, that was one of the, I don't know, that was one of the shocking things, obviously, in the story. Question about, many news organizations, investigative reporters have had to balance, projects, investigative stories with, more daily kinds of, feed the beast kind of stuff. Can you advise a young investigative reporter on how to manage this challenge?
Well, I have to do that all the time because I'm mainly writing about, the government and the economy. And I mean, I guess I was already bureau chief when we were getting the story, concluding the story and getting it out. And yeah, it's very tough because there's so many other things going on. You just have to carve out that one little space and make it work. When you don't have that much time, you focus on the top interviews that you really need to do them in person as often as possible, as always, and then come running back to the office and get on with the rest of the day. But just keep it's kind of on a slow burner, but don't let it drop. Don't drop the important bigger picture story. And it's hard, it is, but it's doable.
Yeah, I just recently, just this year actually, was put on a move to a different team. So I'm following national news in the US, still doing investigative work when I can, but I have to juggle, and that's how I started, before I had the luxury of being just an investigative journalist for quite some time. It's exactly right. You have to really juggle, and you're always having to sort of negotiate time with your boss to, to justify why you need half a day to spend on something. You're not filing a story out of it. It takes longer, and you just have to keep at it. And but really, I think the best investigative journalists start out covering a beat, because that's how you find out. That's how you get leads. For if you just sort of parachute into something you've never really covered before or don't really know much about, it's much harder to develop a really good, hard-hitting investigative story. You need some knowledge, you need to be up the learning curve a bit. So that's the best way. I mean, once, like every news organization I work for, if you have a really good idea and you have a great lead for a story that's sounds like it could be really big, usually the editors they'll be interested in that. But then you have to negotiate the time, because they always expect it much faster than anyone can humanly do.
If you break a couple of scoops, that you get a little bit of leeway, which
yeah, exactly.
Cash in.
Keep getting credit and using that credit.
I mean, I'm just curious. I read the stories several times. They're complex. It's a complex topic, and it's a lot of different players. And obviously, I'm very impressed with your guys' ability to execute it. But I'm just curious, did you get a lot of? What was the reaction like? Obviously, I didn't realize this. I think this package won the Loeb Award too, right?
Yes,
it's been which is great. It's really gotten recognized, which is wonderful. But did you feel that at first, or do you think is it something where you got the reaction that you had hoped for initially from it? Because it's not an easy story to read. It's a great story, but it's challenging, for some. I'm not an expert in this area, and it's not some. But it's amazing work, I think.
Well, thank you. I was surprised.
I guess my question is, did you get?
What I was saying is I was surprised by the impact that we had. I hoped that we'd have the impact we ended up having, but you never know, and I was quite excited about it and surprised, and maybe there's still going to be impact. I don't know. I think it's one that's sort of stuff has come along this whole time. In terms of reaction to the story was very well received. Tremendous traffic, readership when they came out, and then we were able to sort of break stories along the way. The different companies dropping it. Calls in Congress for investigations in
and
Mexico.
The fact that the size of the jugs would just not fit in any lab anywhere in Mexico. We were able to kind of piece that together with Cam's help.
So I thought it was exceptional work, and exceptional in what kind of impact we had. I'm very proud of the work we did together.
Well, me too. Yeah, I didn't expect that this much impact either. I was very happy that the people read it and didn't get bored by it, and
exactly.
Chemicals,
Right.
I didn't get bored by it. It's just more that it's complicated. It's a complicated subject. But this is true of many investigative stories. I think it's like usually you have to read. Usually, if they're a lot of the time you have to read. I find that at least I'm dumb to read them many times to really figure, to really make sense of it, because and it doesn't. And on some level, it's kind of crazy. It doesn't make sense, of course, but you're showing you're showing what's happening. So
right, and especially this topic, chemistry. A lot of people will never get chemistry, like me, for example. So the big challenge is to be able to explain it in a way that anybody can understand without losing the needed sophistication behind the subject, and to try to bring it to life. Like the thing that really just struck me was how many people are killed by, or OD on heroin and cocaine and meth a year, just in the United States and globally even more, and how how this leaves a trail of death and war and destruction and just all kinds of horrible stuff, and that none of that would be possible without chemicals. Once I sort of got my head around that, I found it much easier to pursue this and to actually write it, especially, well, not especially, but in the case of Ecuador, it actually was the causing of war, that just sort of blew my mind that, to me, that made it much easier to tell the story. It revolved around this warlord, and there'd been this horrible bombing, and it was all over this chemical that I'd never heard of. Like, it's crazy.
And think about all the details that didn't make it in too.
Yeah.
Like, there were so many stories that we couldn't fit in, or we couldn't get it corroborated. And I mean, incredible stories about how these drug cartels take what they want and divert just anything they need. They can just come in and take it. So all that stuff that we had heard about how it was being done, and we put some of it in the story about the highway robberies that go on in Mexico, and just like entire armed battalions coming in and just seizing what they want and moving on, right? And there was more. There's so much more to some of those stories that it's really incredible, and it's it's still going on, of course.
Yeah, and it's like I mentioned Breaking Bad before. Like, it's so much easier for them to get the chemicals than on Breaking Bad. They just like take the whole truck, and with at gunpoint, and they don't have to stop a train and drain it and do the crazy stuff they did there to get that chemical. So, to me, it really drove home the levels of impunity that Mexico suffers under, and also the Andean countries in South America, because of these narcotics and the demand for them in the United States. And I just found, the fact that American companies were profiting from that, essentially. I mean, they were selling their goods into that horrible market, probably without knowing, but they were doing it all the same. To me, that's
not spending enough time to look and see what
right.
the impact was.
Exactly, turning the other way, whatever. So I think that's the way you can make a complex story like this work. Once you sort of see the clarity of it and the simplicity in the end of the story you're trying to tell, the rest are just sort of facts and details to fill in the narrative, so to speak.
Well, guys, I'm gonna ask Peter to come back in. I really am grateful to you all for the stories, but also for speaking a little bit about it tonight and talking and answering all these questions. It's a great journalism, and
Thank you.
I really applaud you for doing this, and it's been really a thrill to spend the evening with you all tonight. So Peter, if you want to come back in.
Yeah, I just want to echo what John said, and I also want to thank John first of all, for doing a great job of choosing this, being the head of the committee that chose this. It was clearly an excellent selection, well deserved, and it's even clearer now after hearing the two of you tell the backstory. We understand just a little bit more about how much work went into it. So I think this helps burnish the reputation of the Impact Award itself, and it reflects well on our organization. I have to say that we picked it. So, but all credit to you guys, and congratulations. And I hope everybody on the call enjoyed it. And thank you, and good night.